when working with unordered lists, by default they get the circle applied to them. And so I want to show you how to change that. So we're going to specifically go after our unordered lists inside of our navigation by using a nav UL descendant selector. That way it doesn't affect any kind of other list we might have on our page. So let's go ahead and apply a list style type. And we can look at all these different types. You know, maybe we want to work with a circle, and we can see what that looks like, a little donut. Maybe we want to do a square, and we can see what that looks like with little squares. But again, there's a lot of these you can choose. And you know, if it's Georgian or lower alpha to upper Latin to all these things. But let's go for right now to a none. And we're going to just take those off. And then from there, let's look at using the inspector. So in Chrome, I'm going to go to right click and go to inspect, and I'm going to hover over my UL here. And you can see that I have some padding in green and some margin orange applied to that. So let's take that off and see what that looks like. So I want to go to that UL, and I want to say margin is going to be 0 and padding is going to be 0. And so we're going to get rid of both of those. And that's going to go right up against the wall now because there's no margin or padding being applied, and we can see that when we hover over. However, each list item is a block element, and they kind of shove the next item after down. And so I want, for right now, let's put these next to each other by changing this list item into a inline element. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say our nav UL LIs are going to now change their display type from being an block element into an inline element. And now when we refresh, you can see that those all go next to one another. They also have these underlines, and I don't want those. Okay, now I could go into our anchor tag and change and add a text decoration to none to get rid of that underline. However, that's going to apply itself to all links on our site, and maybe I want to keep, you know, this link underlined down here, or links that I might put inside the content. I just want to get rid of those. And so to do that, I need to specifically go after our nav UL LI and anchor link, because again, those have the default text decoration as an underline. And so I'm going to turn those to none. You can see now when I refresh it, the underlines go away, and the underline down here in this link stays just fine. Okay. Now, when we're working with different display types, I have an example here. And what I have in this example is paragraphs, numerous paragraphs. You can see them all in red here with this background color and white text. And we have one turned as none, and you can't see it. It's not being displayed, and it just kind of collapses in on itself. We have one that's inline here, and you can see how items are going next to one another. And we can see this one right here is block, okay, and it blocks off a whole chunk. And we can see this one right here, which is called an inline block. And this is a new one I wanted to talk about a little bit today. Now, there are some differences between inline and block and inline block. Number one, let's apply a height to these, and we're going to make these 100 pixels. And let's look at the differences. So when we look at inline and we apply a height to it, it doesn't apply. These only apply to block elements and inline block elements. So right away, we can see one of the benefits to an inline block. It's really the best of both worlds, right? We are able to give a height like we do to the block element, and it applies specifically to an inline block and gives us that height as well. But height will not apply to inline. Let's add a width of, let's start with 200 pixels and see what that looks like. Okay. Now we can see the inline element does not get a height or width, but the block does, and an inline block does. An inline block, again, is kind of the best of both worlds. The next item goes next to it and not under it, but we still retain all the block elements of that. If we apply a margin, now we're going to apply a margin of 20 pixels, so there's a margin above and below and to each side, and let's look at that. So now we can see on this inline, we did get some margin here on the sides, but we did not get a margin above or below. So that's one thing. Block got it, and inline block got it. And last, let's apply some padding of 20 pixels. Now you can see this padding kind of shoved this up, but it covered on top of some of these other lines right here, right? It didn't allow us to, and this is kind of going through the middle of it. So what we know from a display inline, it's not going to accept a height or width very well at all. Margin is going to kind of go on the sides, but it's not going to allow us to go above or below. And padding does work on the sides, but not above or below. When all of those work inside of a block element and an inline block element. So for specific applications, there's definitely times we want to make items inline block. And this is one of them inside of here, because we might want to give a height to those list items. We might want to give some margin or padding. And so what we want to do is we want to change this to be an inline block. And it looks the same. Now the next problem we're up against is maybe I want to create little buttons or little blocks for each individual element. So let's look at this. And let's determine a few things. So we have an unordered list that's a block element, and we can see that because the line goes all the way across the screen. We have a list item here, and it hugs the word itself. So we know it's either an inline or inline block, but we can view right here that this is an inline block. And then we have the anchor links inside of each one that we know are inline because it just hugs the word itself. Okay, and we know that inline or anchors are inline elements. So we want to make our anchors a little bit bigger. We want to actually apply some padding of these to 20 pixels. And when I refresh this, you can see it did add some padding on the sides, but it didn't actually add the padding above or below. Now let's go ahead. I'm gonna make a change to that. Let's take this color here of our links, and on this anchor item, I'm going to not only turn off the underline to it, but I'm going to change the color back to white and give it a background color of that blue. Let's look at that. Now you can see we have that problem we had before where the item was coming down below, and that's because our anchor link now is inline. This is not our list item. Our list item would have that effect, be affected just fine. So we want to change our anchor link to be a different display type. And what we want to do with that is we want to make these block. And you can see here now how this menu item, these have all changed. And again, if we look at this and inspect individually, we can see an unordered list go all the way across. We can see a list item just hug as an inline block element, and we can see this specifically, this anchor link. We can see home kind of being, has a little circle here, and then we can see padding go around that blue when I hover over that. And it makes it so that when I hover in this section right here, that this is also part of the link. Now I could apply those same things, the same padding to the list item. However, this wouldn't be a link right here. And so it's really important to make sure you apply that padding to the anchor link itself rather than the list item. That way I can hover and I can click right here and I get home or about or media or whatever item I'm trying to click on. It just makes the menu a little bit cleaner and a little bit better. So that's a really easy way to make a menu with specific items. And if we wanted to, we could go through and add that same background color to a bar, and maybe we'll do that in the next video.